Hi class, this is lesson 9.1 on geometric sequences. So we are going to learn about geometric sequences today, and so that's going to be our first vocab word here. And geometric sequences are just the ratio of successive terms when you are multiplying by the same number, r, and we're going to call that the common ratio. So when you see the abbreviation R, that stands for the common ratio, and that just means what are we multiplying each term by to get to the next term in the pattern. Okay, so everything we're going to be dealing with today is a pattern, and we're going to be figuring out, okay, what am I multiplying by to get to that next number. So on these first examples here, all we're doing is you're going to ask yourself, what did I multiply by to get to each number? So to get from 1 to 4, I took it times 4. 4 to 4, I took it times 4. Same with 16 to 64. So I'm multiplying by 4 each time. And so I would say that my common ratio, my R value, would be 4. And so then what they want us to do is find the next 3 terms. So all I'm going to do is just multiply each next term by 4. So 64 times 4 would get me 256. 256 times 4 gets me 1024, and then 1024 times 4 gives me 4096. Okay, let's try the next one here. This time you notice the numbers are getting smaller, but you still want to think of it in terms of multiplication. So you could think of it as one of two things if it's maybe easier for you to picture division first. So like here, I'm going negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. So that means I'm multiplying by a negative number each time. And since I'm getting smaller, I'm going to be multiplying by a fraction. So in this case, I'm multiplying by negative 1/3. It could also be thought of you're dividing by negative 3. But in terms of our R value, we want to go with what we're multiplying by. So since I'm multiplying by negative 1/3 each time, I'm going to keep that pattern going. And so to find my next 3 terms then, I'm going to take negative 1/9 times negative 1/3. And remember, when you type that into your calculator, you want to put the fraction part in parentheses. So I would type in parentheses, negative 1 divided by 9, parentheses, times, parentheses, negative 1 divided by 3, parentheses. So after I take negative 1/9 times negative 1/3, my next term should be a positive 1/27th. And then take 1/27th times negative 1/3 again. My next term should be negative 1/81st. And then my next term should be 1/243. So just multiplying by negative 1/3 each time. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and do these next two, see if you can figure out, first of all, what are we multiplying each time to get from one number to the next, and then find the next 3 terms. Go ahead and do that on these next 2. And then check your work with the answer key, see if you got the right answer. Okay, and then the next part of our notes here, we're going to learn a formula that will help us find any number in a geometric sequence. It could be, that way we don't have to keep going in order, finding the first, second, third, fourth, etc. We can find any one really quickly just by plugging it into this formula. Okay, so to find some number term, we are going to take the first term times our common ratio to the power of n minus 1. So like if we're finding the 10th term, we would take 10 minus 1, take it to the power of 9 then. Okay, so let's try a couple of these. This first one says the first term is 500, so that means our a sub 1 value is 500. That's my first term. The common ratio is 0.2, so my r value is going to be 0.2. And then we want to know the 7th term of the sequence, so that means my n value is going to be 7. So all I need to do then is just plug that into my formula. So I'm going to say a sub 7 equals my a sub 1, 500, times my common ratio, 0.2, to the power of n, which is 7 minus 1. So I'm going to have, when I simplify that, I'm going to have 500 to the power of 0.2, or times 0.2 to the power of 6. And then this I can just punch straight into my calculator. So I can type in 500 times 0.2 to the power of 6. Be careful, if you're going to plug this part into your calculator, that 7 minus 1, you need to make sure that's all in the power part. And some calculators recognize that, some don't. So I would just recommend going ahead and simplifying this part and then typing this second step here into your calculator. So go ahead and try that. You should get 0.032. Oops, 0.032 for your final answer there. Okay, so go ahead and check and make sure that you get the same thing when you type that into your calculator. You could also write it as a fraction if you really wanted to. Okay, let's try this next one then. They give us our first term of 5 and our common ratio of 2, and we want to find the sixth term. So our a sub n equals 6, just the n part equals 6. And then we want to find the sixth term. So when we go to plug that in, we're going to say a sub n, our sixth term, equals our first term, 5, times our common ratio, 2, to the power of 6 minus 1. Okay, so into my calculator, I'm going to type in 5 times 2 to the power of 5. And I can punch all that into my calculator, and I should get 160. Now remember, if you're doing this without a calculator, you need to remember your order of operations rules and make sure you do the power first, and then you would multiply. But either way, you should get 160 for your sixth term. Okay, let's do, actually, why don't you guys go ahead and do the next two on your own? I think we're starting to get it now. I'll get you started on this first one here. We want to know the ninth term, so our n is going to equal, n is going to equal 9. And then they don't give you the common ratio this time, so you have to figure it out just like those first problems we did. So what am I multiplying by each time to get to my next value? And hopefully you recognize that you're multiplying by -3 each time. So -3 would be my common ratio. And then from there, I can go ahead and plug in. You should recognize that your first value, the first number in the pattern, is 2. And so now you should be able to go ahead and plug all that in. So go ahead and plug that in, finish this one up, and then go ahead and do the next one. Check your answers with the answer key when you're done, remember. Alright, and then we'll finish it up with a couple of story problems. So this first one says, a ball is dropped from a tower, and they give us this table that shows the height of the ball's bounces, which form a geometric sequence. So we are wanting to know what's the height of the sixth bounce. So we're going to use that same formula we were doing, so I'm just going to copy it down here so we have it. And you will not need to memorize this formula for the quiz or test. I will give this to you, just you need to know how to use it and what to plug in where. So anyway, now we're ready to identify our values. So we want to know the sixth bounce, so n equals 6. The first term in our pattern is 300. And we need to figure out our our common ratio. So going from 300 to 150, and then 150 to 75, what am I multiplying by each time? If you're not sure, you can think of it backwards. How did I get, since I'm getting smaller, how did I get from 150 to 300? Well, I took it times 2, so the opposite of that, I would be multiplying by 1/2. Okay? So if you're not sure, there's a couple ways you can get there. Just make sure it works for each term and that you've got it going in the right direction. We have to be going from 300 to 150. We can't do it backwards. You can think of it backwards to kind of get you started, if that's helpful to you. But make sure we're going in order. So since we're getting smaller, we're multiplying by a fraction. So my common ratio here then is 1/2. So now I'm ready to plug all that in. So I'm going to say a sub 6 equals my first value, which is 300, times my common ratio of 1/2. You could plug that in as 0.5 right away into your calculator, remember, to the power of 6 minus 1. So my final thing I'm going to plug in then, I'm going to go ahead and write 1/2 as a decimal, so it's easier to just type into my calculator. So into my calculator, I'm going to type 300 times 0.5 to the power of 5. And when I do that, I should get 9.375. Make sure you get the same thing on your calculator. And then since it's a story problem, don't forget your label. Okay, last one then. This table shows a car's value for 3 years after it's purchased. And again, it forms a geometric sequence, so we want to know how much the car is going to be worth in the 10th year. So our n value is going to be 10. Again, we don't know the the common ratio for this geometric sequence. But if we look over here, how did I get from 10,000 to 8,000? How did 8,000 get to 6,400? Again, it's getting smaller each time, so I know I multiplied by a fraction. And you should find out that you're multiplying by 8/10 or 0.8. There we go. If it helps, remember, you can go, okay, how did 8,000 become 10,000? What did I multiply by? Or you could also type into your calculator 10,000 divided by 8,000. And when you type that in, you get 1.25. And so then if you inverse that, you should get 0.8. So that's another way you can think about it too. So my common ratio is 0.8, or 8/10. And then my first term, my a sub 1, is 10,000. The hardest part about these is really just figuring out what your common ratio is. Okay, and so just remember that if it's getting smaller, you're multiplying by a fraction or decimal. If it's getting bigger, then you're multiplying by a whole number. Okay, alright, so then my last step, I'm ready to plug all that in. So I'm going to say a sub 10 equals my first term, 10,000, times my common ratio to the power of 10 minus 1. Simplify that. And into my calculator, I'm going to type 10,000 times 0.8 to the power of 9. And once I do that, I should get out $1,342.18. And you can just round it to the nearest cent since we're talking money. And don't forget your dollar sign since it's a story problem. Alright, that wraps up this lesson. Don't forget to go back and do those couple of problems that I told you to do on your own, and then you can start your worksheet.